All right, everybody. Good afternoon. Sorry if some of you are on your phones. If I can get everyone to grab their seat, we are going to get going pretty quick here. We know we're a little bit late, but that's okay. We'll get through the afternoon in due time, I promise. Welcome to Conversations with Indigenous Leaders, brought to you by the Chilliwack Chamber of Commerce, Shakton First Nation, UBCM, Stalo Community Futures, and our program partner, Prospera Credit Union. We're super grateful that you could join us this afternoon. And I do want to do a quick shout out. Thank you to Corvina Designs, who have provided us with the lovely ornaments that are on your tables for you to take home with you, as well as Quick's Farms for the decor and flowers. One little housekeeping note. This is a smoke-free, vape-free space, both inside and outside. There is a smoking shed if you are a smoker and you do choose to go outside. It's out the front doors to the left and then around the building. So if you can kindly respect that land, that would be lovely. Now, without further ado, I'm going to invite up Chief Derek Epp to give us a welcome.
All right, Ts'elxwéyeqw, good morning or afternoon, I guess. Good to see you all. Wheelilik Ts'elxwéyeqw Tribe. My traditional name is Wheelilik. My given name is Derek Epp. I'm the chief of Chilliwack First Nation, just down the road. I just want to welcome you guys all here today to Ts'elxwéyeqw's land. This is the land of the Ts'elxwéyeqw First Nation. Beautiful building you're in. Congratulations to the three communities, Ts'elxwéyeqw, Atchilitz, and Yaqaquiyas, for putting this together. It's such an amazing facility and really great to see you all here today. I'm going to be quick because I think we want to get to why we're here with the presenters. But before we do, I want to ask that Simulto Darcy Paul comes up and starts us off in a good way with a welcome song.
want to welcome all of you to our building here. The building, we named it the Ts'elxwéyeqw. Ts'elxwéyeqw, best way you can translate it is a dream come true. Our three communities, Ts'elxwéyeqw, Ts'elxwéyeqw, and Ts'elxwéyeqw, like Chief was saying, collaborating together so we can make this building, this space happen. It was a dream of the three communities to have a space like this. Like he was saying, we work, do as we can to have a healthy facility. We do have that space on the south side of the building, a shed there to go and smoke in and bathe. Again, people get confused in our washrooms. The left side is the men's, and the woman's always right. On the other side is the hand wash stations. In the hand wash station, there's a soap dispenser, a water dispenser, and a hand dryer. They all look the same. Keep doing your Tai Chi until you find the right one. But again, just want to welcome you all to our Ts'elxwéyeqw. Thank you, Leila, for asking me to come up here and do this, and the committee that put this on. I hope you all have a good session here today. Get people inside.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. And before we get into the meal, I believe we are calling up Michelle to share a few words as well. Michelle's right here. And then we'll get to lunch.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Gagné. I'm here on behalf of Prospera Credit Union. Thank you, Derek. Prospera Credit Union is proud to sponsor this event in partnership with the Chilliwack Chamber of Commerce and the esteemed Indigenous leaders here with us today. I'm honored to be here on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Ts'elxwéyeqw First Nation and greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. As a community-based, purpose-driven organization, we have a long and dedicated history in Chilliwack and appreciate the Stolo Nation's deep and vital roots in the Fraser Valley. Our ongoing support for expanding our knowledge of Indigenous history, values, and culture in this region is part of our credit union's overall commitment to truth and reconciliation. Our support also includes sponsoring the BC Lions Indigenous Youth Football Program and their Orange Shirt Game in honor of National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, as well as sponsoring an annual bursary fund for an Indigenous student. We're also focusing on learning opportunities for our members and employees through sessions with Indigenous educators, leaders, and writers. The Prospera team recently heard from Haida lawyer, advocate, and artist Terry Lynn Williams-Davidson. She's passionate about preserving our people's culture, language, and strong connection to nature. In her words, we live in a time where we need to look at how we can change to become things that live in harmony with each other and with the earth. In fact, our survival may depend on our transformation. Transformation is embraced as a spiritual, powerful, necessary force in Aboriginal life, a common theme in traditional oral narratives, which also contains important knowledge for human conduct. Now more than ever, we need to look at how we can take responsibility, not just for who we are, but who or what we can become. Our journey at Prospera is just beginning, but we're grateful for opportunities like this one that serve to build bridges and pave the way for greater understanding, respect, and collaboration. So thank you for letting us be part of this special event.
Seuss. Okay, thanks, Michelle. That's it's really great to see the partnership that Prospera is bringing to this as well, and huge kudos to Prospera to stepping up and being a part of our initiatives here. A lot of the work we do is new, it's innovative, and it's exciting to have partners like Prospera as well. Also want to make sure we acknowledge and recognize our pillar partners and program partners who help us do what we do all year long, which includes Molson Coors, MNP, ML Anderson Group, Fortis BC, Baker Newby, Culture Co., Elements Casino, Scotiabank Women's Initiative, Prospera, and Myriad Technologies. So now that you're probably sick of hearing from me with all this, let's eat. You're going to hear from me a lot more, so let's have a meal. Let's share some food together, and then we'll get into the presentation, and we'll get right to it. So let's try to stay on time. Let's make sure we start at 1 p.m. sharp. If earlier, great. So, of course, our guests and elders, please serve yourself first. I don't know who's going to be brave enough to stand up and identify as an elder, but if you do, great. And go ahead and eat, and we'll get to it. And thank you. First of all, big thank you to Big Al from Ts'elxwéyeqw, who is catered for today as well. Thanks, Al. So enjoy, everybody, and then we'll get right back to it. Okay, everybody. Now that I wanted to make sure Brian got his second piece of cake. Good job, Brian. Had to wait for that. So let's get to it. Welcome back from lunch, everybody. I hope it was really good. I really enjoyed it, and big thank you to Al. Al, thank you so much for another beautiful meal. So we're going to get right to it. So we have two very special guests here with us today. We have Maynard Harry, which it was an illusion for Leanna for the longest time, thinking his first name was Harry, not understanding that many of us have two first names. So it's Maynard Harry, and we have Stuart. Sorry, Stuart, I can't pronounce your last name. Alsgaard, did I get it? Good enough. Both of which are coming from the Powell River area. Maynard was actually the chief of Tla'amin for a number of years as well. And Stuart was the former mayor of Powell River. So kind of a unique experience, and they're going to share a bit of a unique story with us as well. So come on up, guys. I'm doing a bit of a prelude here. These guys are sharing a bit of a unique story. We've obviously done this conversations with Indigenous leaders we started that last year. We felt it was a huge success. I'm one of the executive members of the Chilliwack Chamber of Commerce. I actually don't really know my role fully with Leanna. I think it's just a lot of it is helping support a lot of these Indigenous initiatives and the education aspect of what we're trying to do here in the city of Chilliwack. So really big thanks to all of you for coming out. It's great to see a full room and a really diverse group of individuals here to take in this experience. Maynard and Stuart are going to bring a bit of a deeper dive. I know a lot of our educational initiatives have been higher level. This one's going to go into a bit of a more deeper dive, and a lot of sensitive and real hard information is going to be shared. So if you need to speak to anybody or need to chat about it and debrief after, let me know. But it is just to acknowledge that our history isn't just rainbows and butterflies, right? So it's a lot of the real history you're going to hear from Stuart and Maynard and the impacts of that history and how that's impacted as to where we are today. You know what, I want to acknowledge Maynard and Stuart. They're coming from a municipality that has, one First Nations, one municipality. We're in Chilliwack. We're very diverse. We have 9 First Nations communities touching the boundaries of the city of Chilliwack. So yes, we can learn a lot from what these two individuals have done in their territory, but it's, part of my responsibility, part of our city council's responsibility, and the work I do with Ken to really try to make this our own here in Chilliwack. But this is part of the work that we're trying to do in Chilliwack, and it's a good example of really what can be done when you're forward thinking. And I think, to be honest, in Chilliwack, I think we're on the right track. I have a fantastic relationship with Ken, the council, the staff there, and all of our senior city staff, and a lot of you here today. I have great relationships with a lot of you, and I think that's something that we want to continue to build on. And that's truly the heart of reconciliation, is relationships. So I'll stop, otherwise I'll keep going and eat into their time. But I guess Leanna gives me scripts, but I never follow them. So make sure that you have Slido for questions. Use hashtag conversation23 to ask your questions. We'll be monitoring them, and they'll be doing their presentation, and then I'll help moderate the Q&A throughout the entire presentation as well. So without further ado, here's our two guests, Maynard and Stuart. So thank you, guys. Thank you.
Testing. Can you hear me okay? I'm glad I don't have to move a microphone down. It's kind of embarrassing. But good afternoon. My name is Ts'elxwéyeqw, member of the Tla'amin Nation. So about 100 miles north of Vancouver, Kwastanayu is my ancestral name. Maynard Harry is my English name. Former chief counselor, council for 4 terms. The Tla'amin Nation is a standard First Nation. There's 203 plus in British Columbia alone. We're a treaty nation, so we signed a modern-day treaty through the BC Treaty process in 2015. So the Indian Act no longer applies. The Indian Reserve System no longer applies. We've achieved sovereignty and self-governance. I'm going to get into some topics around 4 pillar areas. 3, sorry. It's very informal. I'm not a formal person, but my language is going to be very direct, but very honest and fair. It'll be fair. It has to be fair. I'm going to alienate you for the first little bit, but the priority is not to alienate, because alienation has nothing to do with reconciliation. It's going to be hard for some of you. I don't know any of you. I have no right to judge any of you, but the language I use is for a purpose. I use this language because this is what's missing in Canada. This is why reconciliation is not possible in Canada. It's not. And I'm going to get into that. I'm going to put out some very, very loaded comments. They're there. They're loaded for a reason, because Canada has given itself a pass for 150 years. I'm going to talk about things like the Indian Act, the Indian Reserve System, the Indian residential school system. I'm going to talk about reconciliation and Aboriginal rights and title. But I'm going to end with opportunity, creativity, working together. I don't know this region at all. All I know is that my nation is exactly like the Ts'elxwéyeqw and the Ts'elxwéyeqw Nation. I want to honor I'd like to ask the Ts'elxwéyeqw and Ts'elxwéyeqw people for your permission to be in this hall, because one of the recommendations is moving beyond traditional land and territory acknowledgements. I don't know about you, but I kind of grow tired of people acknowledging the territory. I think one of the defining characteristics of being a First Nation person, when you go into a territory that's thousands of years old, you don't just move in and then start dismantling it. You actually ask for permission. Because what defines Indigenous peoples is not no trespassing and suing each other and threatening each other, saying, get off my property. That has nothing to do with being a First Nation person. Being a First Nation person in Canada, what's now Canada, is about sharing. Being invited to the culture of the Ts'elxwéyeqw and the Ts'elxwéyeqw people, an invitation into their culture. It's all about acknowledging and respect. And that's what's missing in Canada today, is everybody's so busy with profit, development. I notice the crowd is quite young today. That gives me hope for reconciliation. I'm a very cynical person. I look at the older generations in Canada, and they've failed First Nation people miserably. Your parents have failed my culture. The education system has failed First Nation people. And why do I have the right to talk in this manner? Well, I've been a chief counselor for 4 terms. My community has had 7 road blockades internally. We've blockaded ourselves. So I've lived in the conflict and the dynamic of an Indian reserve community. And every First Nation in Canada has that dynamic. We all have our band offices. We all have our Indian reserve economies. And they're bad. It's time we started talking about this directly instead of bullshitting around for 150 years. Cities and towns are right next to municipalities. And it's time settler Canadians started opening their eyes about who their neighbors are, because you've stolen everything. So I'm looking at you, but I'm not judging you. This topic has to come out because Canada's doing such a bad job in reconciling its colonization history. You are on stolen land, and you should ask for permission. Because I think the best way to do that is to compare your cities, towns, and municipalities with Indian Reserve communities, because I'm going to get into the priorities and the objectives of the Indian Reserve system. And the objective is only segregation, alienation. You drive through any Indian Reserve community and you actually study the economy, you'll see how white settler alienation has affected individual families. I look at the young leaders like Derek, Rocio. I think our kids are in good hands with this type of leadership. I'm not here for them. I'm here for the elders who've died poor, my elders in my territory. They've died poor in poverty, living in dysfunctional families, things that every family living in a city, town, or municipality takes for granted. You guys are used to safety, security, building wealth, building equity, mortgages, RRSPs. You took that away from every Indigenous family. And it's time for white people to stop expecting the blame to end. Most of you here will say it's not my fault, it happened in the past, but it is your fault. And this is really edgy stuff. It's hard for me to be here, but to hear the elder, the person giving the prayer, I knew this would be tough. But the prayer is what gives me strength to come up and talk to you in this way. And I'm not talking to you. Don't leave this presentation heavier than when you entered the room. That has nothing to do with reconciliation. Blame, shame, guilt, too negative. Human values that are corrupt, vicious, have nothing to do with reconciliation. Reconciliation has to do with sharing, communicating. This is what's missing in Canada, is communicating, respecting. That hasn't happened from your culture to mine. It hasn't. But you probably have good things happening here in this area. Keep doing that. I'm very critical of chambers of commerce because you're the biggest culprits in Canada. Because every business within the city, town, or municipality has built wealth within a traditional territory of a First Nation. I'm going to get into the Tla'amin Nation. My community, 1,200 people, $48 million a year is what we contribute to the local economy. I want to see appreciation, and I haven't seen that from the Powell River Chamber of Commerce. No appreciation, but silently building wealth, silently developing. I see all the construction in your town. Everybody's building wealth. Go to First Nation communities and study the people. There's an iron dome of white privilege in cities and towns. Acknowledge that. Own it. So I'm not going to leave you with really, really heavy words. You guys are familiar with Bar Rescue and John. He does a brilliant job of breaking people down, but then he builds them up. So alienation is not my objective here. But I'm going to go and talk about the ugly stuff because I don't use the word reconciliation, and none of you should as well. You haven't earned that. Don't use reconciliation. You don't understand what it means. I do, because every First Nation person has a right to use the word reconciliation because we've lived under the Indian Act. We've lived on an Indian reserve, and we're of families that have been affected by, directly impacted by Indian residential schools, a horrific, grotesque part of Canada's history. Own it, because your culture did this to my people. So I don't talk about reconciliation. I talk about the truth. Truth and reconciliation. That's an equation. I don't jump to reconciliation. That's cheating. I see too many companies on their website saying they've reconciled. That's cheating. If you want to reconcile, I'm going to introduce Stuart. You want to reconcile, there's only one path to reconciliation, and that's the truth. I'm going to talk about things today that you probably haven't heard about. because white privilege in Canada is based on 3 principles: ignorance, silence, inaction. And you're very good at that when it comes to Indigenous engagement. Own it. Own it, because that's where reconciliation starts. You are guilty of the advantages of living in a city and town. Every one of you is guilty. 2023, looking at the work that Chief Epp is doing with your organization is wonderful. That's how you contribute to making it such a big, what I'm going to talk about is so complicated and it's so frustrating. That's why I talk in such passion. It's frustrating to see that Manitoba landfill, trying to find positive aspects to Indigenous engagement. It's so complex with Aboriginal rights and title, Canada's colonization history, reconciliation, and how you can contribute and move the reconciliation needle is to communicate. Don't be afraid to step onto an Indian reserve. I get tired of white people saying, I understand First Nation people because I spent the night on an Indian reserve, or my best friend was a status Indian. That's garbage. You know nothing about what it's like to be a First Nation person. Don't do that, because that's like being a pretendian. The only way to understand First Nation people is to go on to an Indian reserve, a system that white settlers created so cities and towns could develop. That was the only reason for Indian reserves, was so your towns could get bigger, access valuable natural resources. So I'm going to move on to Stuart because he's got a wonderful story. Stuart is a former politician, but in my eyes, he's a leader. Stuart gives me hope for reconciliation. In 2008, he was given an ancestral name by the Tla'amin people, Koko.
I don't really like using microphones, but I presume you would prefer that I did use it. True? It doesn't mean I think, of course. Otherwise, what I now will please, and we'll see where we go from there. So there you are. Sigoyam te pech de quebut stolo. Imut tet winaldi. I just wanted to begin with a bit of a connection to Chilliwack. I come from a mill town, born in Powell River, British Columbia, outpost of empire, I guess, if you wanted in colonial terms. I'm the son of a newspaper publisher, a weekly newspaper publisher, Al Alsgaard, who had newspapers on the Sunshine Coast in Gibsons and Seashelt. And I think he looked upon his son as a person who had inherited veins of printer's ink and would get on with a great business of carrying on in that role. Well, we all know what's happened to weekly newspapers today. But in his era and in his time, and when I was just a little kid, we would go off to these conventions, and it didn't mean too much to me, except there were a lot of other people around, not too many other kids to play with. But he was a great friend of the Barber family here in Chilliwack, the Chilliwack Progress. I don't know if any of you remember that newspaper or that family. My recollection of coming to Chilliwack was coming and standing at the Barber swimming pool, and that was the event as far as I was concerned at that time. My grandfather, Martin Alsgaard, at one point in his lifetime owned the Lake of the Woods. Does that mean anything to you? And I have pictures of the little shacks in that era, and there am I, 8 years old, standing in a 6-foot dinghy, my first naval command, rowing vigorously from the float to the shore. And lastly, to the detriment again of my dad, I had a thing about streetcars and interurbans. And the deal was, whenever we came to Vancouver to be with the grandparents, he would promise me that we would get on streetcar number 1 and ride them all the way through to number 20 on Powell Street. And then I might be satisfied, but no, came the great challenge, the interurban to Chilliwack. Getting up at 7 in the morning and standing down there in Hastings and Carroll in the old barn and rattling along And I'm pleased to see that you've got one of those interurbans running around up here. Well done, Mr. Mayor. And the other thing is, in my naval career, you had CFP Chilliwack. I believe that was the engineering school in those days. But there was also the place where we brought all the innocent young naval officer cadet candidates, and they got their first training here. Well, you're looking at the commandant of the fleet school in the Ts'elxwéyeqw years later, who inherited all those people that came from Chilliwack to turn them into naval officers. Well, the story is available in the lobby for $5.95, and I'll autograph it for $1 more if you want. But to the business at hand, I look upon the great fortune that I had in my career, the things that I have done, and the chance things that have come along, and where it has led me, and where we are today in this particular situation. You know, the winds of war blow. They're hot as hell out there right now, and I wouldn't want to be standing around here in 6 months' time, if there are any of us left, talking about war and remembrance. Because World War number 4 will be fought with sticks and stones if we get that far. So here we are, hanging on this as an international thing, and it's in everyone's mind what's going on there. But we're talking about something else here. We're talking about relationship building. We're talking about a history in this country that is shameful in many, many ways, that can be addressed in very positive ways. And when we take a look at some of the points that we'll bring to you for your consideration and some discussion, we'll look forward to that as we get on. So I'm not going to tell you about all the things that I've done. You may or may not know that, but I'll just tell you this quickly, that I had a career in the Royal Canadian Navy. I retired as a naval captain. I served afloat and ashore, and I had most of my training exposure dealing with young people, training. I'm a graduate of the National Defence College in Kingston, Ontario. I'm a graduate of the University of British Columbia. I served for 16 years as a provincial coroner, trained in Ontario and here, and found from all of that experience that there were many things that I still did not know, even though there were some dead issues mixed in with that. Sorry about that, but I'm going to play that line because that's sponsored by the BC Coroner Service. And with all of that notwithstanding, the one thing that does come to mind is my tenure as the naval aide to the Governor-General of Canada. Very colonial context at that point, not realizing what I was doing. But his name was Ed Schreier, and he went on to become Canada's ambassador to Australia. But it was wonderful to know that family and to experience some of the things that we were to deal with at that particular time. And the principal point in that was to be there when Terry Fox was made an officer of the Order of Canada. So I would just like to think about myself personally a little bit here in relation to what you've just heard from Ts'elxwéyeqw. Growing up in a mill community like Powell River, we did all the things, fortunate little kids that had pretty secure homes at that time. Did all the things that we did, but one thing we couldn't do was play with the dirty Indians. You didn't go into the bus stop. You didn't go there because there was a heads in there, a wash place or whatever you call them, because an Indian had been in there, and you never know what might happen. The only contact I ever had as a school kid was playing soccer. And I'm not taking off my pants to show you the scores on my shins, but I can tell you they're there. But that was it. That was the contact. And for all the years of my early life, through my education and even into my naval career, never occurred to me for a moment, other than the fact that there was a reserve outside of town called Ts'elxwéyeqw in those days, and you knew the rules. In 1950, up until 1972, segregation prevailed in Powell River, and it was evidenced in the local theater, the Patricia Theater. If an Indian wanted to go to the movie in the town site in those days, they waited in the alley beside the theater until all the white faces got in. And then 27 were admitted to sit in the balcony and stay in that balcony until the film was over and then leave via the fire escape. Never to interact. 1972. All right, I knew all about this back when I was there in 1950 and 48 or whatever, and so on, and but just took it for granted. So it's a story. It's a terrible story in a way. It's a story of stolen land. It's a story of many other things. It's an abusive treatment, not only of ourselves, but of our neighbors and the other people in the community. So we've got all the horror stories, but what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And have we got anything underway? I think we can tell you some, or give you some examples of what happened. The person who educated me very smartly and lastingly is sitting right over there. And I can still feel from our first encounter his grip around the back of my neck when I was the mayor of the city of Powell River. I had been handled by this individual. It gave me 2 words. And what were we doing at that time to create his anger, to bring it on? A brand new mayor who never had any political experience, was prepared to approach it from the point of view of a naval captain, the last absolute monarch on earth, at sea, I guess. But it didn't work that way. Brand new innocent council, all keen and enthusiastic to bring forward the great new dawn of whatever. We are going to build a seawalk along our ocean front, and we shall commence at 1300 the following Monday. So there was all the equipment, and there were all the people who were ready to watch it commence. And down they went, and scrape, and of course within half an hour, the hand, the squeeze. He's a powerful man, probably black belt 8th Dan or something, who knows, but whatever it is, who said to me, "Stop it." And that was an abrupt point in my life. What am I going to do now? And what, in the few microseconds of what I thought could perhaps be the last moments of my existence, why don't we go and have a cup of coffee? And from there on, the story unfolds, which you'll hear about. So that's my wee introduction. For the moment, you'll hear some of my comments, and I intend to be frank as well. It's one hell of a learning experience, and the thing that's in my mind is, I don't know who these people are. I have no idea, no real appreciation of the cultural background, the significance of all of those things. It's something we must ask ourselves every day in our dealings. You don't play at it, you learn from it. You don't talk about it, you show how it can be done. Next.
Thank you, Coco. I'm trying to get informal. I don't like being too formal, but I'd like to add some foundation to the topic today, and I'm going to reach out to Chief Epp to read a paragraph, to lay some focus to the dialogue. But it's about questions. Like I'm here, Stuart and I are here until 2:45. We know something that you may be interested in. So ask us questions. I'm coming across very direct and very honest. Don't be afraid of me. Don't ask me questions. Challenge me. And because we know things, we've done things over the past 20 years. It's not just over the past weekend. We've lived this in 2 communities. We brought them together, and this is the best relationship in Canada, bar none. And we've done things. So we're here to share because you guys are doing something special here, and keep doing that. I want to encourage you, but I'm going to start with the harshness first, but I'm going to ask Chief Epp to.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you saying that as well, because I think it's important to acknowledge you're all here because you're allies, right? And that's really something to acknowledge for you guys as well. And I've spoken about this on various initiatives or to Rotaries or Chamber, whatever it might be, that part of a duty of an ally is actually taking what you learn and challenging people who aren't allies. So that's a lot of what is being talked about today is really equipping you with the facts, the tools, the reality to be able to be a true ally. And so that's the importance to really, and I like what Maynard's saying, it's not blame, it's not shame, it's not you, even though sometimes saying the word you is not implying it's you personally, right? So I think that's something to really acknowledge and to keep in the back of your mind. And for me, I've, clearly a lot of you know me here. I got blue eyes and a beard. I grew up on the reserve. Not everybody even knew I was First Nations. I have a level of white privilege. I do. I've never been to a job interview and been discriminated against because I come across as looking First Nations. I've never been in school and had the same experience as some of my cousins who literally live across the street from me. I've had experiences that I've felt a bit of misplacement or displacement, or unsure and not confident in who I am as a Chilliwack person. But I can tell you at 33 I am. I'm very confident of who I am as my name I carry, Wililik. That gives me a lot of confidence. And now I'm able to walk in both worlds and be very confident with who I am and understand that I have white privilege. I do. And I embrace that, and I know that, and I challenge that as well. So just to keep that in the back of your mind, that it's important to acknowledge as well. So I'm going to share a bit, and I'm not sure if everybody's heard some of the stories of the residential school process and the early days of residential school, and a lot of the experience of our children quite literally being taken from our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. So here's a little bit of a intro to it. So imagine you are the parent of a 7-year-old girl. It's early September and you're expecting a knock at the door at any moment. It's 5 a.m. As with every early September morning, it's still dark. The knock comes and you open the door. Standing outside waiting are 2 older white men. One is the local Indian agent whom you don't know very well. The other man is the captain of the barge parked at the dock below your house. He's a stranger. They have come to collect your child. You have no choice but to turn your 7-year-old daughter over to these 2 white males. You're also expected to sign over parental rights to the administrator of the Ts'elxwéyeqw Indian Residential School. If you refuse, the Indian agent will report you to the RCMP. You will be arrested and imprisoned. If you send her with the 2 white men, you will not see her for at least 10 months. You don't know what will happen to her once she leaves your care. All you can do is trust and pray. Now I want you to imagine telling your daughter she must go with these 2 older males who are strangers, and imagine watching her walk away hand in hand with 2 men she does not know down your driveway into the darkness. This happened in 1939 in Canada, in British Columbia, in a tiny village called Church House, British Columbia. And it happened until 1996.
Thank you, Chief Epp. One of my objectives is always magnitude. That is, it's just a paragraph to all of you. But to Chief Epp's family, Rosillo's family, that's reality for us. So that's the difference, the magnitude and the difference between reality and privilege. Advantages of living in a city and town, the disadvantages of living on an Indian reserve. One was created to the detriment of the other, and they've evolved alongside each other right across Canada. But we're both ignorant of each other. We're scared of each other because of things like Aboriginal rights and title. But this happened to 150,000 people who are deemed status Indians in Canada. It's happened to every First Nation family. The big takeaway from this is the signing over of parental rights. You look at those unearthing of children across the country, that was allowed to happen because apartheid was born and currently lives in Canada. But none of you know that. And it's not your fault. You're ignorant about Indigenous engagement, Indigenous issues. That's not your fault. That's the fault of Canada. And when I talk to non-Indigenous people, I'm not looking at you as CEOs or presidents or board members or councillors or mayors. My best way to reach my objective is to see you as parents, because there's no similarity between you and me, nothing. We're not alike, we're different, we have different DNA, our cultures are different, our languages are different. What defines me as a person is different than what defines every white person in Canada. There's no similarity except our children, your parents. So I don't think reconciliation is possible in Canada, but parents give me hope, especially young. That's why I'm looking at the room going, wow, leadership in your region is young, which is good, because older generations have been nothing but racist and vicious. To me, that's what defines settler people, viciousness. Through your legislation, through your Indian reserve system, and actually using the RCMP to force status Indians after yanking a 3-year-old child out of the arm of a parent and having an institution like the RCMP assault the parent in front of the child, forcing them to sign over parental rights, which gave a priest, a Catholic priest, an Anglican priest, parental authority over that child. That's why priests were allowed to hide all the unearthing of these after murdering 3-year-old children. There are documentaries out there. I ask you, I implore you to go to YouTube, Google, watch a YouTube documentary, and discern between reality and privilege. Where do you fit? Where can you be as part of the solution? I think one of the answers to reconciliation is education and learning. That has everything to do with reconciliation, not anger, blame, shame, guilt, nothing to do with reconciliation. But acknowledgement, like really own it and go, my ancestors did that, but I'm going to change it. And that gives me hope. And that's what younger people have. I mean, some really smart people I've watched in Powell River, the city of Powell River, students, just brilliant. They're different than their parents and their grandparents. They give me hope because they can work with my 22-year-old daughter and they're actually going to communicate. It's very hard to fix the land question because cities and towns are already established and First Nation people don't want to take away your land. They've been saying that since the last few decades, but it's very complicated. Canada, probably one of the biggest impacts to Canada's economy is the land question, because Canada is on stolen land. And I can see 3 avenues to resolving the land question. Every First Nation has a land question. My nation answered our land question through the BC Treaty process, 6-stage process. We're like the Tsawwassen, the Nisga'a, the Manaus peoples on Vancouver Island near Port Alberni. We negotiated a modern-day treaty in 2015, so we are a sovereign nation because we have more control, taxation. We can actually go from building something on treaty settlement lands and actually get it going from concept to shovel in the ground within months. Whereas First Nations or Indian bands under the Indian Act may take 3 years to actually build something. That's what apartheid is. It's using systems like the Indian Reserve System, using legislation like the Indian Act, giving me a number, 554-00-36601. You guys are 575? How many people have a status white card? That proves apartheid exists in Canada. That's all apartheid is segregation using an Indian reserve system and being able to identify us. That's monitoring. That's identifying problem Indians. It's a system that the RCMP uses, the federal government uses to monitor every individual community. Up until the late 1960s, we had a white person that was employed to live on an Indian reserve called an Indian agent. I call that person just a government rat because his job was to monitor every family. He had to monitor where every child lived because every September they had to collect the children, put them on a barge, send them 300 miles away, use force if necessary. His role was to coordinate with the RCMP, the Catholic Church, the federal government, and collect these children and send them away to take the Indian out of the child. So one of the ways to get to actually having a handle on Indigenous engagement is to understand the apartheid that exists in Canada. I don't look at them in a vacuum, the Indian Act by itself, or the Indian Reserve System by itself, the Indian residential school system by itself. I look at it as a partnership with the RCMP, the Catholic Church. They all partnered with each other. They were passengers on the same vehicle. They enabled and strengthened each other. That's a massively powerful apartheid engine, colonization engine. We all know how powerful the RCMP is, corporations. systems. You're a system, you're an organization. You have a culture, your leadership, it should start from. But these things are powerful, and you form part of a city like Chilliwack. You're part of the engine of Chilliwack. You may not think you're contributing to colonization, but you have, because you're living the advantages of what was taken away from the nations in this territory. Something was taken away. When Canada moved in, back at the time of contact right across Canada, a good analogy is Canada moving in and picking up every First Nation person. They're picking up our toolboxes and shaking it, emptying it, putting everything on the ground, our careers, our wealth, our capacity, relationships with our parents and our children. Everything dumped on the ground and actually beat us up in the process, using systems and legislation to beat us up, and to hand back an empty toolbox. And Canada actually said, go fill it up. And we've been filling up our toolboxes for 150 years. But that's what the Indian Reserve System does. You go through any Indian Reserve in Canada, and you've all been through one. You're probably scared to go through one. But I would bet that the white people are welcome in our community. We are pushing for partnerships, and do that. I do encourage you to do that. And we're not aliens. We're not refugees. I don't like the term Indian Reserve, the term Indian Chief, the term Band Office. I don't like those terms because they're very, very colonial. It's confusing. It confuses me sometimes, but you're probably all aware of the 7 terms that relate to Indigenous people in Canada. I'll try to clarify it. Inuit, Métis, and First Nation are 3 distinct cultures. And in Canada, there's 637 individual First Nation cultures. My culture, I'm Coast Salish. I'm from the Tla'amin Nation. Chief Epp is Coast Salish, but from a different nation. There's 203 in British Columbia. But the Constitution recognizes Métis, Inuit, and First Nation as the first peoples of Canada. So it's enshrined in the Constitution. But there are the other terms that make it confusing. Aboriginal, Indigenous, Native, status Indian. I'm a status Indian because I have a plastic card. I take every opportunity to spit on it and throw it on the ground because I hate that card. It gives me tax-exempt gas, tax-exempt alcohol. When I go to a gas station, one of Chief Epp's gas stations, I can get a discount, $1.59, I think it's in my community. Oh, you do? Okay. We do too. It's a discount, but that tax card, white people, I've heard so many, my wife works at a gas station, but I'm standing in lines, signing something, showing my status card. White people are behind me going, wow, I wish I had that card. That's really insulting because I know what my people gave up. We gave up tens of millions of dollars in exchange for a piece of plastic. Do the math. You took away our territories and you gave us our territories 700,000 square acres. Our Indian Reserve is 0.005% of that, and we own 0. First Nation people own nothing in terms of land. It's held in trust by Canada. This is what white settlers did to First Nation. You took away our land, our territories. You tried to take away our culture and our children, but you failed because First Nation people are not broken. You're the broken one. If you look at the way Arthur Manuel, a UBC ISD from Niskonalith, reconciliation mentor, somebody who thinks he's a Aboriginal title person, he will die. He's already passed away, but he will die for his Aboriginal right. His people will. My people signed a treaty, but he's a title person. I really envy Aboriginal, because I wouldn't recommend the BC treaty process. My nation went through it. We gave up way too much I think we signed a shitty deal, but courageous. To sign a treaty, the white privilege blinders in Paul River go up. People in Paul River don't understand what Stewart did as mayor. He invited us to select lands within his municipality. Demonstration of leadership. In return, we invited the city of Paul River to be part of our treaty table. A very formal process, 6 stages over 25 years to negotiate. Our treaty, it's called a final agreement, available online. Go to our website, you'll be able to see it's really complex, $25 million to negotiate. But what Stewart did as a demonstration of leadership was he was frightened. He was intimidated in the early 2000s. I really didn't like Stewart in the late 1990s. He was very military, hard to know, not approachable, a handshake from 2 feet away. But I think reconciliation is an evolution. And Stewart evolved from not a very approachable person to somebody who accessed an ancestral name in 2008. And if you come to a language class in Tla'amin in 2023, you're going to see Stewart sitting with the Tla'amin people. When my nation holds events like this, we get our people together, our elders in one table, and we have a luncheon. I'll walk in and I'll sit down. Nobody bothers to acknowledge me. But Stewart walks in to my community, and he's going to be our Hegoose, our headman will stand up and goes, Koko, come to the podium. And Stewart will be acknowledged. That's respect. It's a real simple demonstration. It's communication. It's human. So one of my recommendations to all of you is don't be afraid of us. We're parents. Like I used to live on an Indian reserve, but I think of the term Indian reserve and I hate it because I think of the Serengeti Animal Reserve in Africa. Antelope, giraffe. I'm not an elephant. I'm not a hippopotamus. I'm not even a game warden. I'm a parent. I'm a community member. I'm a neighbor. Canada tried to dehumanize us by calling us status Indians and you're a band member. I'm learning the bagpipes. I found I was 10% Scottish, so 5 years ago I decided to learn the bagpipes, and I'm still learning, but that's my contribution to reconciliation. You're probably wondering why you're here listening to somebody like me. You're here for 2 reasons. One, you know nothing about Indigenous engagement because it's so complex, and that's not your fault. Because Canada did a massively bad job of colonizing Canada. It made so many mistakes over the past 160 plus years. It was grotesque, it was horrific with all the systems and the bad decisions that were made in our best interests. You're here because that history has to be acknowledged and corrected. So learning and educating yourself about us is part of the process. But the second reason you're here and you have to listen, your chamber has identified Indigenous engagement as an issue is because of Aboriginal rights and title. That's why you're going to see Indigenous relations and reconciliation departments right across Canada. The federal government, every provincial government, every corporation has these specific departments. And it's not a privilege. I look at these departments and I go, that's really unnecessary attention on us. I don't want these departments. If Canada were smart, it wouldn't have tried to erase genocide of people. If Canada decided not to genocide a people, there would be no reason for reconciliation. There would be no reason for these departments. White people look at Indigenous engagement and reconciliation department. You think it's a privilege, but it's not. It's very, very complicated. Any comments?
Yeah, actually, you got me kind of thinking of like a local context. How can I put this into like affecting Chilliwack the best way possible as well? And what keeps coming to my mind is I don't know how many people know about the Ts'elxwéyeqw Tribe or Chilliwack tribes. Yes, thank you, Sean. Ts'elxwéyeqw Tribe, and Maynard's kind of mentioned it. You know, I come from Chiacton or Chiactol. That's not really who I am. When I mention my name, Wheelaylick, it comes from Ts'elxwéyeqw Tribe. So that's really who we are. Like these Indian Act bands here are places we were forced to live, and they all have a place name. So Chiacton actually means Chiactol, which means place of fish weir, because the river ran literally through Chiacton, and we were located there because we were told that we had to stay there. And that's who we were called now, is Chiacton people, because for some reason, Chiacton was easier to pronounce than Chiactol. Phonetically, tell me what's hard about pronouncing Chiactol compared to Chiacton. I don't know. But settler language, right? That's the way it goes. English language is probably one of the dumbest languages in the world, but we've figured it out somehow. But in a local context, it's looking at Ts'elxwéyeqw Tribe or Chilliwack Tribes and understanding that our tribal territory spans from the Chilliwack Valley up into the Columbia Valley, all the way to Hope, and up to the highway here and all the way to Sumas. And that's really who our people were back before contact. That's quite literally fact-based where we used to travel. There's no argument about it. You can't get around that. That was our territory. That's where our people lived. We were nomadic. We traveled around from season to season. But when settlers came, they figured out, and that's why you look at a lot of reserves and we have the same names from different reserves. The Malaways, the Joes, the Williams, the Kellys, whatever it might be, they're from multiple different First Nations in Chilliwack. So understanding that, you got to understand that we were quite literally, when settlers came, it was, well, now you live here, so that's where you're from. And we can't pronounce your last name, so now you're called Joe. And that's actually how it quite literally went about. So in a local context, when you're looking at the reserves and the postage stamps that we're on, Chiacton's about 750, 800 acres of land. We're going to probably have 5 or 6 or 7% of the population of Chilliwack living on Chiacton in the next 3 to 5 years. That's quite substantial in the grand scheme of things, if you look at the entire boundaries of Chilliwack. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. We work really closely with the city on our developments to make sure they meet city standards and they're meeting the community's needs, whatever it might be. So in a local context, and understanding that I doubt anybody knows anybody by the name of Governor Douglas, but you look back in history, Governor Douglas was actually a very forward-thinking man who worked for Canada back in the day. And part of his job was settling the Indian question, settling the land. And he actually had really good intentions. Came to Chilliwack, surveyed out like thousands and thousands and thousands of acres for the Ts'elxwéyeqw people. But unfortunately, some bastard named Joseph Trutch came in and decided to screw that all up. And he reduced our land by 98% to where we're at now, our little postage stamp reserves to where we live now, by 98%. And that wasn't even, the reserves that Douglas was establishing still didn't encompass our entire territory. Thanks, Ken and David. And they're not leaving because of the presentation. They actually have meetings. Ken let me know. So thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate it. But it's real. Like, this is the reality that our people have faced. And so you're aware as well, Chiacton actually wasn't established till 1953. And that really wasn't that long ago. It was surveyed out on a map in late 1800s, 1893, 94. And it wasn't actually officially established till 1953. My grandma was born when it was established, or she was born well before it was established, and not knowing who she was. So really that's the reality of what we're facing here locally. So I thought providing some local context to the presentation is probably important to make sure that we can speak to the reality of what we're facing here in Chilliwack. And I know I don't want to be pushing this along on the agenda either, but I want to make sure we provide some opportunity for everybody to ask some questions as well.
Okay, Robbie, can you put on the Canada's colonization slide, please? I'm going to quickly, a couple of minutes on the Indian Act, the Indian Reserve System, and the residential school system, and that's the ugly part of the presentation. Okay, that's the evidence of apartheid up on the top right. That's my status card on the left with a Canadian flag and my BC driver's license. And I don't know why I blacked out my eyes. It's not a pornographic card, but it's a plastic. That's not a status card. And even our people have to stop thinking of that as a status. It's a race card. It identifies me as a person from a particular race. Why? Why would Canada do that? Why is nobody asking that question? It's a race card. That's apartheid. The Indian Reserve System is apartheid. The Indian Act, all the Indian Act is, it defines a relationship between Canada and every First Nation band. The Indian Act identifies every nation as Indian bands. Very, very colonial, very, very paternalistic piece of federal legislation that applies to every Indian reserve across Canada. And all the Indian Act is, it's authority legislation. It gives Canada authority over First Indian bands in Canada. That's the only purpose of to keep us in place, to keep us from developing, to monitor us by giving us. The Indian Act created the term status Indian, gave us numbers, manages the land on Indian reserves. The final approval for anything, unless you're a land code band, you have to go to the 20th floor in Ottawa to get permission to build something on an Indian reserve. And it's colonization. Simple, it's colonization. Many amendments. The thing about parental rights, the most horrific part of the Indian Act and the residential school system, the Indian Act gave the Indian agent authority to force parents to sign over parental rights by withholding a living allowance. And if you live on an Indian reserve, that welfare check is critically, if you want to eat, you have to sign over the parental right to the priest. And the really bad thing about that, I've been hearing it's starting to come out now. Children who attended residential schools, and now they're 70 years of age, they become 70, but their parents have already died. But they attained 70 and only finding out that their parents were forced to send them to these schools. It wasn't voluntary. Who has the right to do my culture? That's how my culture differs from your culture. My culture would never, ever do that to another culture. But why did Canada feel it had the right to be supreme and do that? These children died before having an opportunity to reconcile. They resented their parents their entire lives. Now think of the reality. Reality, privilege. Reality for First Nation people is hating your fucking parents, to the privilege of being allowed to ignore. Being allowed to ignore. That's white privilege. Being allowed to be silent. Being allowed to be inactive. That's privilege. I'm here because of those residential school survivors who never had an opportunity to have a relationship. I don't know what you feel about your parents, but I would have loved to be able to take my mom to Vegas or Reno and have a really functional. That's what it's like, I'm assuming, living in a city or town, is the safety and the security. Build wealth. White people took that away from First Nation people. Acknowledge that. You took away our opportunity to build wealth. RRSPs mean nothing in our communities. Mortgages, we're not allowed to enter into mortgages. Why would your culture do that to my culture? Wealth, I mean, I finally, my equity has gone through the roof because I live on treaty settlement lands. So now I own my home. I think for every family in the room, building wealth is a priority. And these are conversations you have at the dinner table with 15-year-old children, which is the way it should be. But First Nation people, it's not a priority because we don't know anything about mortgage. We know now with people like Rocio and Chief Epp, the younger gen, the creativity, the energy, the momentum in First Nation communities and helping us build wealth now. But in 8 generations, you took away wealth, you took away territories, and you allowed First Nation people to go to these schools, be traumatized, fill up all these skid rows. That's why you should feel guilty, because you've enabled systems. The Indian Reserve System is still here. You guys didn't build it. Canada built it. You can help fix it, but it's the enabling. It's living in cities and towns and still having those advantages of building wealth, whereas people in Chief Epp's community have no access to mortgages. For us to build economies, it's hard. It's harder on Indian reserves because of our economies. Capitalism does not exist on Indian reserve lands. Think of the magnitude. Think of it. Peel back the layers. Think in a different way. Stop being white privileged by being allowed to ignore the question and getting tired of listening to me talk. Peel back the layer. Capitalism does not exist on Indian Reserve lands because our biggest employer are band offices. All our business assets are owned by the nation. We're more aligned with socialism in Russia than capitalism in Canada or the United States. Think about what it's like to be an Indian, a status Indian, living in a home on an Indian reserve. There was something from 1885 to 1945 called the Indian Reserve Pass System. We weren't allowed to leave our communities for 60 years. 60, that's 3 generations. You had to get a piece of paper to go into a city. Why? Why would Canada do this? That's why I'm angry. I'm not angry. Anger is garbage, but it makes me angry. It should make you angry. This is your culture. You did this, and the implications are still here because it hurt the capacities in our families. It hurt the relationships in our family. That's my reality. I would love to be of a home where my dad was a mechanic and he's allowed to build wealth and succeed that business, teaching me how to put a car together. I watch all these reality shows. I get white privileged kids learning from their parents. You guys have been allowed to build wealth for 8 generations in what's now Canada. That was taken away. That's why I call it the Iron Dome of white privilege, because you don't seem to care. That's been demonstrated to me. When these children were being unearthed, I was quite excited. It's a very morbid topic, but I thought there was a real opportunity for leadership. I looked at chambers of commerces across Canada, the car dealerships, restaurant owners, bar owners, hairdressers, transportation companies. I wanted you guys to stand up and go, I want justice for these children. None of you stood up. Every one of you were silent. And I was angry. I said, my nation spends $48 million in the local and regional economies. We don't have a capitalist economy. 99% of our business comes into Tla'amin from Ottawa, from our revenue sources, gets spent in Paul River. Car dealerships, hotels, restaurants, transportation companies. We spend all our money in your cities. Many of you have gotten rich. Your families, old money, have gotten rich from First Nation territories. I'm waiting for appreciation. I'm waiting for your businesses to stand up and stop being cowards. All we want is you to go to your your racist Crown prosecutors, your racist RCMP officers, and lay charges against Catholic priests. Put it on letterhead. That would be a massive statement. That's the leadership. Think differently. Stop being ignorant. I'm ignorant about your city's town. I'm very ignorant. I don't know what it's like to be a white person. You're ignorant about me. But think outside the box. Stewart is a very good example. People like Stewart exist. And I wouldn't doubt some of you are like Stewart. I have no idea. But do something differently because Canada is failing. Chamber letterhead, your government letterhead, your business letterhead. Write a letter to the Crown prosecutors. Say, why have 751 children been unearthed or potential graves identified? What are we doing about it? It's a simple question. Like I know I'm more human than white people. I know this for a fact because I demonstrate it. There was a 15-year-old girl who died in the U.S., and it broke my heart. I actually shook my head going, that parent is living my worst nightmare, because I have a 22-year-old daughter. And it broke my heart, even though she was from a different culture. What have you done to go to that place, because that's what's missing in Canada today, is that human quality. You can hear of 751 children being identified in a property, but you do nothing. I would do something. If my culture did that too, I would get angry. But that just strengthens apartheid. When you just sit there on your hands and you're being a coward. Evolve. I'm going to pass it over to Stuart to talk about his experiences. I'm going to go back and forth to reconcile. Negative part over. I think my message has been sent. Just listen to me. I'm not judging you. I have no right to judge you, much like you have no right to judge me. The only people who have a right to judge me are my daughter, my wife Sue, and my mom. So that applies to everything. It's a really good measurement. I have no right to judge you. Don't feel bad. My worst fear in these presentations is to have somebody leave and go do harm because you feel guilty. Guilt has nothing to, it doesn't move reconciliation in a positive way. Don't feel that. I only talk this way because Canada did such a shitty job, an inhumane, grotesque job in colonizing, and still doing it. But you can fix it. I look to you guys as a solution. I'm going to get into reconciliation and leadership, but I'm going to pass it over to Ts'elxwéyeqw. And
Okay, thank you very much. Just for a moment, cast your minds back 2,000 years when the Vikings were concerned with what was coming out of Scotland. And you heard that Quastade is learning the bagpipes. There's an initiative being mounted to send him over there to put an end to the noise once and for all in the nation of Scotland. Keep practicing. Would you please pay attention and look on your tables, and you will see two documents there. One is the parent of the other. The original is the one that appears in Old English, and it's entitled Community Charter or Community Accord. Picking up on the story of after I had the grip around the back of my neck and we went for a cup of coffee, and then I humbly went back to council to sort of regroup and come up with a suggestion as to where we might go from there. Three of the councillors immediately rose to the occasion. Three women who will live, of course, on that charter until the day it continues on basically forever in the relationship building. It's a 6-point document, and all it really says is, you be nice to me, and I'll be nice to you. And maybe we can sit down and we can talk about some of the things that are grating and grinding to us. It's like trying to overtake a willing blindness in a way. When you read through those, you come to the 6th and last one, and it's the most significant one on that page. And it simply says that this is a living document. Now, if you flip that thing over to the other side and take a look and see what it says, notice the date on it, or not on the other side, the other sheet. The first one's dated 2003, and the next one is dated 2018. It was renewed by 2 successive councils to me, by councils of the day, and the language basically stayed the same. Instead, it was no longer the Corporation of the District of Powell River, an impossible title. We changed that in 2005 to be the City of Powell River. But with the editorial content taken care of, the document is held. It is held, even though you may have weak periods and you may have changes of heart or whatever it may be, or debate on all of this. On that slide that was up there a moment ago, it showed you the death count, the children's. Where that sign is established in Powell River is on the site of Hospital Number 4. Hospital Number 4 was a beautiful, great 4-decker building built during the war years by the Powell River Company to satisfy the needs of the Powell River community. Not the Claremanagh community, the Powell River community. When that hospital was demolished in the early 90s, the site just sat there as a basic ruin. But on the 10th of May, 2003, when that document was born, and I had the privilege to serve as the mayor, I had my council present with me, and in my presence was the chief counselor and his counselors, but the most significant part were the elders of the day, sitting in a long table right where that hospital stood, just about where those orange signs were. And I got up and I said, "This is the original village site of Ts'elxwéyeqw, the big river. Before the dam and when the salmon and all this sort of thing took place, a different culture lived there and left behind a legacy of legend and all the things and the stories that are so grand and great about it, which we're learning about today." And I said to the people of Powell River who stood around, "I am returning this land right here and now and apologizing for what took place." And there was a deathly silence in that crowd. And while they stood there in their deathly silence, we then got up and went out and stood in the street and walked 4 blocks down to the community hall, Dwight Hall, because we were going to sign that document that you see in front of you. And I thought we'd get a crowd of 50 or 60 people and maybe a lot of screaming protesters outside. Who knows? Kwastane and myself stood to one side in an adjacent room waiting for the little ceremony to begin, and I expected about 50 to 60 people when we walked in there, and we just go through the motions, and then a lot of bad and ugly and evil press following all of that. So when the ceremonial drummer came in there and hit that thing with a loud bang, and all the dust came out of the uppers and so on, and the doors opened, we walked in this order. Elders first, chief counselor and council next, mayor and council in the third part of the queue, to 650 people in that hall. 2 ministers, 1 federal and 1 provincial, who arrived without telling us they were coming. I don't know if you remember John Reynolds, a name that was at one point Deputy Prime Minister. He happened to be the member for that particular riding. There he was. But we didn't know he was coming. Up to the stage we go. We sit there. There's a long table, pens and the original documents, and we sign it. And all our councillors sign it. And it goes into a shadow box, one out to the government of the Tla'amin Nation, the other one to the city of Powell River. And there they are to this day as a way of finding a mechanism whereby we can sit down and talk about these things. We may disagree, but that's the healthy part of it. We're talking about it. And you may just, heaven forbid, learn something in the exchange of all of that goes on. That was the secret of that document. Well, it isn't really a secret because it's just basic human nature. There's a lot of energy in this room, a huge amount. I was the president of the Powell River Chamber of Commerce for 2 years. I was the founding member of the Community Futures Organization in Powell River. And all this other sort of thing. Me, a naval officer, doing this sort of thing. But I did it because I wasn't a naval officer anymore. I was out. They retired me in 1986. So my task was to get on with what? And what drove me on, of course, was realizing we had all these opportunities and the tremendous talent. Look at each one of you. You're incredible people, really. Inside every one of you is that little flame burning away saying, I can do something. It's not about I'm afraid to do something. I can do something. I'll take on some responsibility. I'll work with other people. I'll lead my community. I'll make sure my business is as successful as can be. I'll remember that I'm going to be replaced by young people, and I want to make sure that they have every opportunity, but they have to understand the history of who we are. And to the everlasting credit of the government of British Columbia in the educational role. If you want that dogwood certificate to get out of school, you now have to demonstrate from grade 10, 11, and 12, of your choice, that you have 4 units of credit. If you don't, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're not getting out. So you want to take a look at what is the course content? What's the course training standard? What are we trying to convey in all of this? And who is teaching it? This is the beginning of it. This is how it's starting along. And wherever you are in your particular school district, I know what the status is in Powell River. Looks pretty good. But it's not competition. It's the growth of knowledge and the growth of us as human beings. We can do better than this. We don't need to be squabbling and fighting and carrying on the way we are today. That doesn't have to happen. But I can't stop it from happening. But all of us together in a way, when we rethink what our opportunities are and where we might go with all of this, you betcha we can do it. And it begins right here at home. It's a disgrace of what took place in terms of our history. Shame on us and all that good stuff. But you must be aware that this has taken place. You must be prepared to learn about other ways of life, other cultures, the basic point for who these people are and what they can do. We're in it together. Fail not at your peril.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart, Maynard. I think it's raised some really good points, and I really appreciate how, Maynard, you kind of took us through the difficult discussion. Let's be real. Those it's hard to hear, right? Like it is really difficult to hear that sometimes, but wrapping it up with what's possible. And Maynard's absolutely right. I've been in this role now, coming into my 8th year, working with government. And when I say government, I mean provincial or federal. It's shitty. Let's be real. It sucks. It's not great. It has its slogs. You're through a lot of different bureaucracies. You have to meet with various ministers who have, they're segregated, they're siloed. They don't work together. They barely talk. So trying to get decisions through Parliament or through different ministers is extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. But I think where this actually can be actionable is on a local level. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about the work that we do at the Chamber and I do here in Chilliwack, sitting on various boards, being involved in different committees, being involved in mayor task forces, whatever it might be. Because I truly believe we have an opportunity here to do something different locally. The province and the feds aren't going to do it for us. It's going to be us. It's going to be the business community, the RCMP, our city and council, our staff, all the local companies that we work so closely with. And that's how we can truly make a local difference in Chilliwack. And I think you see it, like I say this term a lot. A lot of my job is just making shit up. That's what happens. That's part of the job. MSU, just make shit up. Because there's no handbook on this day and age of Indigenous leadership. There really isn't. When I got into the job, it was good luck, see you later, figure it out. And that's really all part of it. But the big opportunity, I feel really grateful to be in this time and place of being an Indigenous leader, because we have such an opportunity to do something different and unique that meets Chilliwack's needs. And I love that about us, because I always say the term, we can do better together. It's not about Chiacton, it's not about Chilliwack, it's not about Ts'elxwéyeqw, it's about all of us and how we can work better together. And I think that's a lot of what we want to do in this city of Chilliwack. And kudos to these guys for doing something different in Powell River. And that document is so cool in the way it's literally just a way to talk and a way to open up dialogue and a commitment to argue, a commitment to probably not see eye to eye, and a commitment to talk through that and work through it. So I think it's really unique. So right now, I want to make sure that we provide some time. We have about a half an hour for questions and answers, or whatever might be on the minds of each and every one of you here today. I don't know if we have Slido up and running. If not, if you're brave enough to stand up and ask a question, I would love that, because I think the dialogue comes from, yeah, for sure, if you need a microphone, pass it around. But I think the best dialogue comes from the local questions, and I think that's how we can get to a root of how we can really move forward together. You know what, Maynard, I got it. You go ahead. Maynard, they're going to be a lot towards you. He's not listening to me.
So I am a local school trustee here in Chilliwack, and I was really interested when you speak about like local governance and what we can do at the local level, partnerships. What role did the school board and the school district play in some of the barriers that you've broken down, and what can we kind of extrapolate from that to a municipal level for council as well as?
Thank you for that. The exercise that we went through in our region started at the top with Mayor Alsgaard. And we did things differently. Like there's a playbook that we did. We involved the media. It wasn't just Stuart and I starting a relationship and going out for lunch or going play golf or by ourselves. He brought his counsel. I brought my counsel. But we had Laura Waltz, the Powell River Peak editor, in tow while that she was doing stories on the relationship. Our community's seen us working together. And that, because it was a presence in the Peak newspaper. Everybody's seeing what we were doing. We pissed people off. He lost votes because of coming out of his comfort zone. He flew our flag in the middle of his city. People thought he was an Indian lover. They didn't like him being that close, but he took the risk. And that's what differentiates politicians from leaders. I think we have a lot of politicians. I think we have very few leaders. Stuart is a leader because he stepped out of his comfort zone, stopped being a politician, and he actually became a leader. He invited us to select lands within his municipality. We invited him into our community, and he's recognized by the He was given an ancestral name. The funeral story, I won't get into that, but he did things with our elders that go above and beyond a politician. So, Stuart, did you want to add something?
No, but just that the questions raised, build on that. Talk at you, talk to us, talk to yourself, get on with it. So you don't sit there. Do something. You leave here. We have all our names. We will come for you in the night.
And I do want to acknowledge your courage to listen to me. It's a hard presentation to give, and I can't imagine what it's like for you to sit there and listen to somebody like me. But I'm not lying to you. I'm not lying, and I wouldn't do that to you because I think that's what Canada's done to Canadians in regards to Indigenous people, is they've lied to you. So you can fix it by, I think in 2023, it's exciting to be a young person, to be in a leadership position, because there's opportunity to partner. Aboriginal rights and title, it's still in its infancy. Canada has a long way to go to answer its land question. You're going to see assertions of Aboriginal title in every territory across Canada. That's litigation, people. That's Delgamuukw. That's the Ts'elxwéyeqw Supreme Court of Canada decision. If the BC treaty process is not going to work, then First Nations are going to say, the hell with it, we're going to court. And that's where it becomes really expensive, but that's what I hope, because I'm tired of being poor. I'm tired of owning nothing. And it's unacceptable for our band members to be the poorest, Canada's last citizens. We're the first peoples. But your culture's made us poorer. And that's the reality. It's reality. We got to fix it. So leaders like Chief Epp, it's a tough job. But anyways, other questions?
Yeah, I know. I think I can speak to the local, Margaret, where you're mentioning with that as well from the school district. Keep doing what you're doing. I think a lot of it is what we're trying to do. We held a panel session, a month ago. I can't believe it's November already, with the entire school district, all the teachers, all the admin, everything from the bus drivers, you name it. And it was a good opportunity to hear from local leaders as well as people like Keith Carlson and other individuals to teach a bit about the history. Keep doing what you're doing. And I think the biggest thing for me is I've been able to witness and see the curriculum that's available to teachers to implement in their classrooms that's specifically touching on Indigenous history, who we are as people. Use it. Keep as a school district, hate to use the word forcing, but like really force the teachers to learn it. And I encourage them the same way they've done it throughout their entire educational journey. Read it, write papers about it, regurgitate it. You're going to screw up. We all do. But at least be committed to teaching and learning. I think that's the biggest thing. And I always go with intention. If your intention is good, then you can't be wrong. If your intention is good, then keep doing what you're doing because you're going to get it right. So yeah, I really do appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to some of the future work we're doing at the Chamber that'll kind of build off of this as well. So yes, Allison, yeah.
First off, thank you so much for sharing. This is a very special afternoon. I have a couple of questions for you pertinent to the Sunshine Coast as you're going up the highway, I see that it's been on the highway signs and the mileage signs. It's all also in the First Nations language, all the way up. And then I have heard that Powell River, and I'd love to understand where you are in the process, is looking at changing the name Powell River to the original First Nations name. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that experience to get more awareness.
The name change issue in Powell River, of course, is based on the historical reference to Powell, Dr. Powell, who was a colonial figure, administrator. He was a medical doctor responsible for medical issues in the province during the Douglas period, and sailed past Powell River aboard HMS Rocket, only to see the waterfall, and the commanding officer of the ship said, "Oh, there's a waterfall," and turned to the navigating officer and said, "Does that place have a name?" "No, it doesn't." "Oh, very well, we shall name it after Dr. Powell," hence that's the name Powell. Powell goes on to be involved in many things in the government of the Crown Colony of those days, and one of which is to deal with the issue, being responsible for education in the province as well, residential schools, which were functioning at that point, but of course he reinforced it and carried on in the belief that this was a good way to deal with the Indian problem. And so the legacy goes, and you can read all of this by just pumping it into your little machine and find out all the things that can be said about Israel Powell. The conclusion being that within our area, the city of Powell River is the last holdout for a name change. Everything else has changed. The library, the museum, the hospital, the school district. Everything is gone, and they've done this with great enthusiasm. But when it gets down to changing the name of the city, then, of course, it's a matter of some generational issues. I was born in Powell River, and you're not changing the name because I was born here. Well, who the hell are you? Other than the fact that you were born there. So you can go and live in your house and call it Powell River, whatever it is. This was an exercise in bringing forward the community, not only about name change, but it was all based on the community accord as a method of approaching how we might do it, community involvement. And you have to also remember that the population profile changes. Old-time families die out. New people come in, they don't care, they don't know what this is all about. And others that do care because they have to be angry at something. So they got out of bed that morning on the wrong side, and they are then angry by definition of getting out of the wrong side of bed, I guess. And they're there to protest and howl and yell. And then who doesn't like to protest? My God, I found a sign in the basement. Protest. So I hold up my sign and I protest. I'm not sure what I'm protesting about, but I have my sign. It's my right to carry that. And that's all part of the country. In a way, that's how we're made up. We feel strongly about different issues. Will the name change? The people will change the name. I'm not in government anymore. I'm out of it, been gone since 2011, 12, whatever it was. And the new councils have come through and they debate that. And right now, some are terrified, elected officials, terrified that this should be raised as an issue. By God, my neighbor won't speak to me. My chickens will die. That's right. I will be an absolute excluded from all of this. So please make a decision for me. You elected me, now make my decision. Get rid of the timidity, for good's sake. You instinctively, we all understand that we have a role to play somewhere along the line, and we choose our style, how we want to do it. We grab our opportunity. Carpe diem. Seize the day. Get on and do what you think you might be comfortable with in making a contribution. You saw those slides that were up here, and you've heard from Costa Dea. From that side, the side that we don't talk about or haven't talked about for a long time, but unfortunately or fortunately, now we're talking about it. This is Canada, itself an Indigenous name. So we take a look at all of the diversity, everything else that goes on in the country besides this issue, but we must deal with this first because when the ice melted, they were here. And that's 20,000 years ago. And it's a whole different way of learning and living. And it's their way. Just like our way is our way, in a sense. And when I say our way is our way, individually, where we see ourselves in all of this. But that's not the way to grow. You know, now think of this. All your little kids and your grandkids and all this kind of stuff, they're all running around biting at your ankles and doing everything that they're designed to do. Your function is to keep them alive and well and healthy and educate them, but be very frank with them. When I have to depend on a 9-year-old to fix my computer, I know I'm being phased out. And with that, I'll leave it.
So that naming issue is horrific. I knew that when it first started 18 months ago, when our chief, our Hagoose, sent a letter to the mayor of Paul River saying, please change your name. We'll work with you on the identification of an ancestral name. First Nation people are different than non-Indigenous people. We don't name things after individuals. We name them after landmarks or spiritual things. It's there. The names are there for, we don't hold people up and give them special, like Israel Powell. Powell River's named after Israel Powell. But he was the superintendent of Indian Affairs for 17 years. He advocated for more he wanted to build more residential schools. Our elders heard this, our community heard this, and we know what that institution did, that system did to our people. And we thought it was a simple request. I didn't want the name requested to be changed because I knew the hornet's nest that would come out. I knew the alt-right, the conservative right would come out. They want to keep the name for convenience. We want to change because the reality hurts too much. And there's no argument there. It's just simple humanity. I mean, if my nation was named after somebody who massacred communities, I would want to change because it hurts. So, but there's a lack of leadership in Paul River. To be blunt and honest, it's been 18 months. If I were a leader, I would make a decision and not be scared of the people, because that's what leaders do. Leaders don't. They make decisions on the best interests of the community, the people. But they have to use their morals and values and take out the conflict of interest. And it's so simple. I mean, leadership to me is simple. It's just making the right decisions based on the way I was brought up as a person. I don't need an UNDRIP. I don't need a 94 calls to action to act. I just start relationships. And that's what I encourage you to do. Don't use UNDRIPs a waste of time. The 94 calls to action, it's a waste of time. I just act. If I have a question, I'll ask it. I don't need a commission or an agency to tell me how to start a relationship or what to respect. I'll identify issues within a community and I'll respect, like education, heritage, culture. I know how important those things. I don't need something in bullet form to say, this is how I should act. I think I know how to start a relationship, and you start with respect. You start with asking questions. Don't be afraid of asking questions. That's the biggest obstacle to reconciliation, is fright, intimidation. And I know these issues are really hot topic, and if you stand up and say something, people might ostracize you. But that's a really big obstacle to reconciliation. But the naming issue, heated issue in Paul River, and I think it's I don't know where it's going to go, what the new mayor is going to do, because no relationship exists. He's afraid to phone our Hagoose. A year and a half, 2 years into his term, I think he finally is starting to make inroads into Tla'amin. And Stewart would have made the inroad in the first couple of days. It's really simple. Just start a relationship.
Hi, so my name is Jessica, and I am a reporter with the Chilliwack Progress. As I had to have a good laugh when you asked if anybody remembered the Progress, because I'm here. So the last few years I've been working hard, I think, to decolonize my journalism and my reporting. But when I go home or go back to the office today, what should I write about? This is so much the opposite of the storyline that we've been fed, that we need to do A, B, and C. And so how do I, as a journalist, get your message across to readers? And the same for everybody in the room, because everybody's going to go and talk to 5 people about what they saw today or what they heard today. So if you could maybe just break it down into maybe just a bite, like a sound bite for us almost, that we could get people to start listening to maybe a different narrative.
Tell the truth. Do your research. Like, I'm very cynical. Don't just listen to me. Get into communities. Step onto an Indian reserve and talk to an elder, talk to a youth. Like, my daughter's 22 and she criticizes me all the time. She has different perspectives on reconciliation. I don't think it's possible because I overthink it. I think reconciliation should be possible for every Indian residential, the 80,000 that are left. We have to make it possible for them. We have to make sure they can reconcile the traumas they've had. But I'm not a survivor. I'm an indirect survivor. Reconciliation for me it's way more complicated. It involves the Indian Reserve System, the Indian Act. The way my family has been disrupted by Canada, it's very complicated. Reconciliation for me is the land. That's it. There's no other reconciliation. It has to be the land. I think one of the biggest things first things Canada should do is increase every Indian reserve by 100%, 200%. I mean, it's our land. And yet we only have 0.2% of Canada's land mass recognized as Indian reserves, and Canada has stolen the rest. I would dramatically increase every Indian reserve in Canada right now and write a $10 million check to every status Indian, because getting $40,000 cows and plows or the $10,000 specific payout, that does not define my culture, what Canada has done to my relationship with my parents and my siblings. That's priceless. Losing the language, being alienated from your community. How do you put a number to that? $40,000 to lose your culture? To be raped by a Catholic priest? To be murdered by a Catholic priest or a nun who incinerated a fetus? These horrific things happened in the thousands. Stop ignoring, but do your research. I think implore people to go to Google or YouTube, listen to people like Murray Sinclair, Phil Fontaine, people who are speakers and they have their own story to tell. And you'll hear the same language from them as you are from me. Stuart Phillip, UBCIC. He talks in this language. Clarence Louis, survivor, Montreal Canadian fan as well. I don't know. It's get to the truth. The truth is there. There's no reason to be ignorant. Go to YouTube and watch documentaries. You'll hear exactly what I'm telling you. You'll find that I'm not lying to you. Our people are living the reality, and that's unacceptable. But do your research, talk to people, get information. You're all capable of that.
Stuart, I had a headline in your article that Canada has a huge historic, what's the word I'm thinking of? Deficit. Okay, you can have that line, that's free. Most of us have no idea about the Indigenous history of this country or the events that perpetrated it. But this is the launch. Not if we can fire something off into space and dump things on other people, surely we can do something like this. That's what the country's about. We're not imitating people, we're leading people. We're leading ideas. We're making sure we're not going to fritter away the most valuable asset that any has, and that's the human people. So, what do we say? Be well. Be not afraid.
I think my nation contributes $48 million every year. I don't know what that number is for you, but it's probably just as big.
Well, we're probably around 300 million a year from Acton.
And
Probably, actually, that's a fact. Yeah, we're around 300 million in contribution to the local economy. And whether that's in Salaries are about $125 million a year on Chiacton that are being, or wages, and about $150 million in goods and services being brought to our reserve through various developments. You name it, light industrial to residential, commercial, and then another about $50 million in commercial sales through a shopping center as well. So yeah, somewhere around the ballpark of $300 million in revenue every year.
That's amazing. His nation is no different than mine. Different region, different opportunities, but mine is 48. My nation will quadruple that. That $100 billion economy is coming because Canada's economic landscape is changing. We're not going to settle for living on having Indian reserve economies. We will be wealthy because we're not broken. We've never been broken. We're going to get through the Indian residential school system, the Indian reserve, your Indian reserve system, your Indian Act. We're going to be whole again. But that's the opportunity, is the leverage that Chiacton brings and Ts'elxwéyeqw brings. It's a leverage. Aboriginal rights and title, they can get to any negotiating table for any natural resource in their territory. My nation just purchased the Catalyst pulp mill. We just purchased a $4 million gravel pit aggregate. When we build, we won't build one home, we'll build a subdivision. We just built a $5 million youth facility. We just built a 24-unit elders assisted care living facility. Our our governance house is $10 million. We're not going to build one house. We're going to employ your contracting companies to come onto our communities, employ your people to build a subdivision. I need that appreciation. I need to see the partnerships, and we need to be more vocal about who's making money, because we're starting to, but you've been always doing it. That's the problem. Change that. And that opportunity is there. It's all about leverage and working together, and stop being scared.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I look to Jerry, his crew. Rob left. We've done 3 extremely successful projects with Jerry and his crew. And honestly, the relationship we've built, and Jerry isn't the only one. We've had relationships with other developers, different companies in Chilliwack. We go for lunch, we catch up, we just have a relationship, which I enjoy. And it's just to pick up the phone, text, whatever it might be. And it's very natural. It's not forced. I think that's a simple message as well. And then even going back to your question, Jessica, for me, it's a lot of the message I got today is don't feel blame, don't feel shame, don't feel guilty, but just learn and acknowledge. Learn and acknowledge the past, the history, the impacts. I mentioned it. I acknowledge I got white privilege. I do. It's not an easy thing to grapple with, right? But it's also important to acknowledge that. And then how do we actually begin to shift the dial forward in a good way and working together? And it's relationships, right? And I'm maybe the opposite. I'm an optimist. I believe we can do reconciliation. I think we can, but I got that energy that I think we can get there as well. And I don't want to miss your question either.
I don't really have a question. I just have, sitting in the meeting today, it's like good to hear the word Aboriginal. It's good to hear the word First Nation. It's good to hear the word Indian Act or whatever. I went to a meeting last night for education, and there was students that were on a film, and they sounded like robots. Everything was Indigenous, and it was all, and you could tell that they were programmed to speak this way. And I believe that because you're not going to go sit with your grandmother and she's not going to say the Indigenous people, she's going to say the First Nations or the Indian way. And I just think it's not something that we should be afraid of to use in these rooms is First Nation. Like, we're not going to change. Like, is Derek going to pay all the money he needs to pay to say Chiacton Indigenous land? It's Chiacton First Nation. So I felt really bad for these youth that were not able to express themselves. They were programmed, and it was the privileged white lady that was sitting there like this in the middle of the meeting because all her students were saying Indigenous people. So I don't know if that's bad or whatever. It's just who I am. It's just it's another trend. We're Aboriginal, we're Natives, we're First Nation, we're this, we're that. And sorry, Derek, we're going to have another new generation of leadership, and what are we next? It's just something that I go through, whatever. But with the truth and reconciliation thing is, I'm learning it's that people have to understand and be open-minded to hear what our stories are about. And I was able to sit with my grandmother, and she had, I don't even know how many children, and she shared with me what it was like to have children and be only excited for this long, because when they're 3 years old, they're going to be taken away from you, and they're going to be coming back, and they're people that you do not know. And with my grandmother and my grandfather's from down the road here, we were brought up rich. I'm sitting here working on shawls for our longhouses, and that's one thing that I'm grateful for, is that my grandparents taught me that I was rich to hang on to my culture.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think it's really important to acknowledge that as well. And Lenny's richness is something that I unfortunately am learning right now, right? That the culture is something that I've been learning for my entire life, really. Fortunate to have a mom who's instilling that in me as well. But I lost that from residential schools. I lost all that in my family from residential schools and the assimilation process. And that's the reality of what many of our families face. I think I'm going back to, like, I always hear, well, what can we do? What next? And I think of, I see bankers, accountants, developers, RCMP here. We see City of Chilliwack staff, whatever it might be. I think the simplest form here locally as well, and is trying to decolonize processes as well, and not like having a relationship. I don't need a terms of reference to talk to you. I don't need to develop a 6-month document to form a relationship. And not all of us are equipped to do business at the speed of business. Like, that's the reality as well. Some communities are, some aren't. You need to take the time to build a relationship. Take the time to invest in the community. If you really want to be involved in the local economy with First Nations, it takes time. It takes trust. You'll ruin trust quicker than you can build it. I can guarantee it'll take you a snap of a second to ruin trust with First Nations that may have taken you a year to build. So just really keep that in mind. And I look at even policies. We got banks and credit unions here. I'll just say it as it is. Banks have Canadian legislation that is governed by them, and it's very hard to get around. That's the reality. So getting loans on reserve through banks is difficult. I tried. I wanted to, because RBC is on reserve. I couldn't get it. I got half the capital and a shittier interest rate because I'm First Nations and living on reserve. So I went to a credit union. It was a lot easier to work through because they're more localized, local decisions. So, if you're working in these institutions, work to decolonize these processes. Our land is valuable. I mean, hell, I don't know if anybody lives on Chiacton right now, but the housing market's going for the same as it is off reserve. And a lot of people don't even know they live on Chiacton. That's just the reality of what we're living in right now. But you can get mortgages at a really competitive rate, but I can't through a general bank. And that's the reality that a lot of us face. I've had to go through tooth and nail to go to different institutions to get home equity line of credits for my members so they can do renovations. Why do I have to do that? Like, that seems so counterproductive, that I have to advocate to get HELOCs. I have to advocate to have a renovation program. I have to advocate for our members to be able to get mortgages. Like, things are changing, but you have to be allies in the way that you want to be part of that change, part of that policy change and that directive that's coming down from senior leaders who don't live in our communities and who don't understand how we operate. So I think that's a lot of the takeaway for me, is looking at it at a grassroots level. What are the true impacts that First Nations are looking to achieve in the community, and build a relationship, work with us, not against us, and really find a path forward to do what Powell River has set the stage for many municipalities to do. It's a relationship. We are going to argue. I can guarantee it. I'm a pretty strong personality. If you come after me with a topic that I disagree with you on, I will battle you on it. I will. But that doesn't mean I don't like you. That just means I want to advocate for my community and our communities. So I think for me, the message, Jessica, is complex. Good luck writing a story on this. I don't envy you. But I think it's an important dialogue and conversation to have. And And I really do appreciate you guys all for being so open and transparent. I don't know if you guys have time for another question or two, or if Rocio?
I'm just reading that story.
So it's about the clothes are off, but they should mostly look at refill on your paragraph and steward by it if they got.
Ts'elxwéyeqw, my name is Rocio Zielinski, and I'm the general manager of Stalo Community Futures. So what happened to that 7-year-old child? That 7-year-old child remembers sleeping on a bench outside and on the deck of that barge. After at least a 10-hour voyage, she arrived at the Ts'elxwéyeqw Indian residential school where she was greeted by nuns and a priest. She remembers the hair on her head being shaved and her head being scoured with a metal brush. Her scalp bled and became infected. It stayed in this condition for over a month. She was also deloused with a white powder. She did not have knits. She remembers crying herself to sleep every night in a strange bed, strange room, in a strange new place. Imagine your child, niece, nephew, grandchild, in this situation. She remembers being alone. She woke to a place where no one loved her or cared for her. She woke to one who would look out for. She woke to no one who would look out for her specifically. She was on her own. She could not speak English. She was given a number. It is with a heavy heart that we announce the passing of matriarch Mary, that 7-year-old Indian residential school survivor. Mary was 91 years old, an elder of the Ts'elxwéyeqw nation. She had over 40 grandchildren and with great-grandchildren and survived by 5 sons. Mary was a survivor. These 2 paragraphs are mere episodes in one chapter of Mary's life. Each Indian residential school survivor has their own episodes, pages, chapters, and books. The vast majority of these books will never be written or told. It is likely many will be forgotten. Darker pages and chapters that will make you question humanity. In Canada, over 150,000 of those books have the same storyline, some much harsher than others.
Thank you, Rocio. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. This is part of my healing as well. The passion and the frustration that I feel is my healing. I've recognized that in myself. I look at that story, that's my mother, and I compare her as a 7-year-old in 1939 to my daughter. My daughter used to manipulate me by saying she had a cold and she'd stay home. She'd do this a few dozen times a year. I had my daughter's back growing up. She knew every rule, the function, the structure, when to eat, when to brush her teeth, the rules, the direction, the role modeling. She got that from me, the thousands of I had that opportunity. My mom didn't. Canada yanked that away. Took the opportunity for thousands of conversations, broken bonds related to you as parents. You have children. Think of the bond. He took that away from you. Would you allow that? One number is too much, but 150,000? There was a death count sign up there, 10,000 children dead. One is too high. But yet, why are you allowing 10,000 children to go unjustified? That's the question facing Canada. That's not part of your history yet. It will be. It will be part of Canada's legacy, but not yet because it's still Canada's present. You're still doing this. And that it's be part of the change. Critical thinking, I think, is the answer. But I want to thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you, Liana, Chief Ep, for the opportunity. And Emad, I raise my hands to all of you.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Before I know you guys have to run to catch a ferry, so I do have something for each of you. We are so honored that you took your time out of your busy schedules to join us and share with us your stories, your expertise, your knowledge, and just, thank you so much for being here. I think everyone in the room is very grateful that you took the time today. I do want to acknowledge the people in the room and thank you all for being here and thank you for sitting through today's presentation. As I look around the room, and the events that we've held through the Chamber of Commerce over the last 2 years, I see a lot of familiar faces. To me, that shows that we have a commitment to change. And like Derek, I'm an optimist. And I do think that there is a path moving forward. I think there's positive change coming. I think we can be the start of that. And I'm hoping that I know that I instill those behaviors in my kids. So thank you. Hopefully, Maynard, we can change your cynicism one day. But I do, you've got your gift bags. Thank you again for being here. Derek, thank you so much for being here with us, being an ally to me, guiding and educating me on where we can take these conversations, the activities that we can do, the lessons that we can help share with our community. You truly are an inspirational leader. I'm glad to call you a friend, a confidant, and so happy that you could be here to moderate today's event with us. Thank you, everybody, and we hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.